The Goblet of Fire movie is notorious amongst the Harry Potter fandom because of how much stuff it got wrong. Obviously, they took a 600-plus page book and adapted it into a feature-length film, so a lot of your favorite moments were cut. But there's one thing they changed in the movie that no one ever seems to talk about, and it's how Harry lied to everyone for pretty much the entire school year. And in today's video, as we continue our series analyzing the movie scene by scene and comparing it to the book, we'll reveal the exact moment when this lie began and how it will affect the rest of the story. My name is Gibby, and welcome to Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter Edition. Today we have made it to the start of the school year as we see our opening feast in the Great Hall, and we'll be comparing it to the chapter in the book titled The Triwizard Tournament. However, there are many revisions and omissions throughout this adaptation, so hang on tight as we cover all the changes across the four major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But of course, we need to start by refreshing our memory on what happened during this scene in the movie. So here's a brief recap. Picking up from where we left off last week with the trio on the Hogwarts Express after the Quidditch World Cup fiasco, we see the flying Beauxbaton's carriage and the Durmstrang boat arrive at the castle. But before anybody meets the new students, the movie cuts to that night during the Great Feast as Dumbledore gets up to talk after the sorting. He tells the students how there will be a tournament hosted at Hogwarts this year. And finally, we meet the new kids from the guest schools, one student being none other than Victor Krum, the famed Seeker. The feast then begins, and we have a short moment in which Hagrid and Madame Maxine meet as she tells Dumbledore her horses will need to be taken care of. Then, after they're done eating, Dumbledore gets up to say a few words and to introduce Barty Crouch, who will be explaining the rules. However, before Barty can get up to the stand, the ceiling begins to storm and go crazy as Mad-Eye Moody enters. Moody then casts a spell at the ceiling of the Great Hall and calms it down, and then after saying hi to Dumbledore, he goes off to the side. Barty Crouch then resumes and says the new age rule to the dismay of all the underage students. After Dumbledore silences the uproar, he reveals the Goblet of Fire and explains that anyone wishing to enter need only submit their name into the goblet and the champions will be selected from there. The scene then cuts to later that night, and we see Igor Karkaroff, the headmaster of Durmstrang, sneaking into the room with the goblet inside. And that is the end of what we're covering this week. So let's waste no time and jump right into the first three categories, which are characters, timeline, and location. First, for characters, typically we have people we're missing, people who were in the book but the movie removed. Well, this week we also have a lot of people the movie showed who are not in this chapter of the book. First, for those who are missing, we don't see Colin Creevey, Dennis Creevey, Professor Sinistra, the Ghosts of Hogwarts, specifically Sir Nicholas, Peeves, and the Sorting Hat. But who did the movie add when it shouldn't have? That would be Barty Crouch, Madame Maxine, Igor Karkaroff, Fleur Delacour, and Victor Krum. Notice something? As we'll cover during the plot changes, we don't see the two new schools yet in the story, which is a great segue into our timeline changes. This week we have a significant timeline discrepancy, and it won't stop here. This episode is the beginning of the entire school year timeline being completely shuffled around. For example, in the next chapter, we'll see Moody mess with Draco, but in the movie that doesn't happen for another few scenes. The Triwizard Tournament itself? That doesn't happen until October. So the movie skips over a whole month of schooling at Hogwarts. We'll be covering a lot of that missing month in the next episode, but for today we're sticking with their first night at Hogwarts. But just know for now that I'm going to try my very best to keep things coherent, even amidst the insane jumbled up mess that is this adaptation's timeline. The good news is that our location category gets a pass. But before we dive into our plot changes, I just want to thank Jason, Cody, Joshua, and the rest of my incredible Patreon members who support the channel each month and help make these videos possible. Also, if you have yet to claim your free copy of The Goblet of Fire on Audible, be sure to do that using the link in the description. It supports the channel with no purchase necessary on your part. Plus, you get a free book out of it. So it's a win-win. Now with that being said, let's jump into the plot changes. Per usual, we're missing the beginning of the chapter as we transition from their time on the Hogwarts Express to them making their way into the castle for the start of term feast. And this walk into the Great Hall isn't a normal one, because this is where we get reintroduced to a couple of our key characters, Professor McGonagall, and Peeves. While they were heading into the school, it was storming outside, so the students were soaked by the time they got up the stairs and in. But once inside, they still weren't safe from water because Peeves was in the sky dropping water balloons on everyone. He got Ron square on the head and only stopped once McGonagall came in, yelling at him, threatening to get Dumbledore if he didn't stop. Peeves eventually stuck out his tongue, threw the remaining water balloons in the air, and flew off. McGonagall then directed the students inside, and Harry was excited to not only eat, but also see the sorting, which he hadn't seen since his first year. After all, in his second year, he crashed a car, and in his third year, he was attacked by a Dementor. So the trio hurried inside and took their place at the Gryffindor table. Once at the table, Harry notices the empty seat at the head table, and they guess that this is where the defense against the Dark Arts professor is supposed to be. But with no one there, rumors run wild about who it might be, and some students take a guess that Dumbledore couldn't find anyone to fill the role. Then before the sorting begins, Harry reunites with his favorite fanboy, Colin Creevey, who tells him all about how his brother is a first year and is about to get sorted. Which brings us to another omission the movie made, and that was the sorting itself. But honestly, the sorting isn't even the main point here, although we do get to meet Dennis Creevey. The main issue I have is the omission of the Sorting Hat song. Each year we get a new song from the Sorting Hat, with it matching whatever is going on that year in the wizarding world. As the books progress, the songs get darker and darker, but this year it's still upbeat. I am not going to sing it for you, but I'm sure you can find it somewhere on YouTube or on the audiobook. Anyway, the Sorting Hat sings its song, the new students get sorted, and we meet Dennis, who gets into Gryffindor and runs to his brother telling him all about how he fell in the lake and something grabbed him and put him back in his boat. That something would be the giant squid that lives in Hogwarts Lake. The squid is extremely friendly and kind to students. Remember, the first years don't travel to the castle by carriage, they go by boat, so that's when Dennis fell in. It makes me wonder if the squid follows the first years every year that they sail to the castle. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. Next, we have a simple change before we get to the introduction of the Triwizard Tournament, and that is the fact that they eat before Dumbledore makes a speech or anything else. Similarly to past years, Dumbledore gets up and tells them he has a couple words for them, and then he literally only says a couple words. This year's words being tuck in, which got a hear from Harry and Ron, who were starving. But now that brings us to the most glaring change for these scenes, which we've briefly touched on in the timeline and character categories. And that is the fact that Durmstrang and Beauxbaton's Academy do not arrive until October. So them showing up in the scene is completely wrong. And by the way, when they do arrive, I'm pretty sure they don't do a whole dance routine thingy like the movie shows. But we'll cover their actual arrival in a future episode. We still have a few chapters to get through before we get there. Next, we now come to one of the most important details the movie omitted, which kickstarts an entire subplot in the book that continues even beyond the Goblet of Fire. Yes, I am talking about Spew. And although the organization isn't founded in this chapter, Hermione gets the idea for it right here, as she learns that the feasts and pretty much everything else in Hogwarts are taken care of by house elves. As they eat, the students talk to Sir Nicholas, aka Nearly Headless Nick, and he tells them about how Peeves almost ruined the feast tonight. He wanted to join the feast, and the other ghosts told him that he couldn't, so he went into the kitchens and wreaked havoc. As Nick is sharing this, he makes an offhand comment about how the house elves were terrified, and at this, Hermione accidentally knocks over her goblet in shock. She then turns to Nick and asks if Hogwarts really has house elves, and he says yes. Then he goes on to make it worse by saying that Hogwarts has more house elves than any other dwelling in Britain, with over 100. Hermione asks if they get paid, if they have holidays, if they get pensions, and more, to which Sir Nicholas is astonished and almost laughing at that idea. He says they don't get paid and most people don't see them because that's a mark of a good house elf, to not be seen. This infuriates Hermione, who refuses to eat anymore, saying that their meal was provided by slave labor. Ron and Harry, on the other hand, continue to enjoy their meal. And as I mentioned, this is the first snowflake in the snowball that will become Spew later on, which I'm excited to cover in this series. But moving on for today, we have a slight difference regarding Moody's arrival. First of all, the ceiling of the Great Hall is already storming because it typically reflects the weather outside. But just like the movie, it does intensify as Moody enters the room. Then after calming the ceiling, Moody greets Dumbledore and takes his seat, chowing down on the leftovers from the feast. He doesn't walk off to the side creepily. Plus, Harry, Ron, and Hermione begin discussing this interesting turn of events because Moody isn't new to them. If you recall from last episode, that morning at the Burrow, Harry had overheard something about Mr. Weasley going to help a man named Moody who is having some trouble with the Ministry. And keep that in mind for next episode as that will come up again. Now, after Moody's arrival, we finally get some details about the Triwizard Tournament from Dumbledore, who now has more time to discuss things after everyone is finished eating. The movie obviously cuts down a lot of this speech and just gets straight to the meat of things by revealing the goblet and introducing the new schools, but in the book, we get way more details. Dumbledore explains that the Triwizard Tournament was hosted every 5 years, alternating between the 3 schools, but it was cancelled over 100 years ago after the death toll got too high. He then explains that the Ministry has made the tournament safer this year, but they've also created an age rule so that no one under the age of 17 may participate. As I mentioned in the character section, Barty Crouch is not here yet, so Dumbledore is the one who announces this rule. He also explains that there will be an impartial judge who selects the champions from each school. He is obviously hinting at the Goblet of Fire itself, but that's another change the movie made here when they condensed things into such a short period of time. In the book, the Goblet of Fire isn't revealed until October. We learn from Dumbledore that the 2 other schools will also arrive in October, and the champions will be selected on Halloween. Until then, it's business as usual, and everyone is left wondering who this impartial judge might be, not even thinking that it would be an inanimate object. And finally, there's a really important part of this tournament that the movie completely ignores, and that is the 1,000 galleon prize money that goes to the winner. This immediately catches the attention of the Weasleys, and that mixed with the age rule makes them very upset, which is another moment that's removed from the movie. After Dumbledore is finished speaking, he dismisses everyone for bed, and Fred and George are left fuming because they turn 17 in April. They think the new rule is rubbish and begin brainstorming methods of becoming older, perhaps an aging potion? As I mentioned, because Dumbledore never clarified what or who the impartial judge was, they believed that it would be someone from the Ministry, and therefore someone that they could trick into letting them join the tournament. As they're all leaving, they ask Ron if he's going to try to enter, but he's still thinking about the prize money for winning. 1,000 galleons would be more money than he's ever seen in his life. And this is just further reinforcing, just like the previous chapters, Ron's feelings about his family's money situation. And it's what's going to cause a further divide between him and Harry later on in the story. Eventually, though, he begins talking to Harry about entering, asking Harry if he would do it. But he makes comments like, "I don't know if we've learned enough yet." So he's obviously hesitant about this. As they got to their dorms and got in bed, Ron finished things off by telling Harry that he would probably try to enter if Fred and George figured it out. You never know, right? Harry doesn't say much to this and just acts nonchalant about the whole thing. But the chapter ends with probably one of the most important parts of this entire video, and our final change for this episode. This might be the most misunderstood part of the entire narrative for the Goblet of Fire. The movie completely rewrote Harry's character to not want to be in the tournament. But in the book, we clearly see that he has a secret ambition and desire to become a Triwizard champion, a desire that he hides from Ron and Hermione and everyone else. This is what we read as Harry goes to sleep. Harry rolled over in bed, a series of dazzling new pictures forming in his mind's eye. He had hoodwinked the impartial judge into believing he was 17. He had become Hogwarts champion. He was standing on the grounds, his arm raised in triumph in front of the whole school, all of whom were applauding and screaming. He had just won the Triwizard Tournament. Cho's face stood out particularly clearly in the blurred crowd, her face glowing with admiration. Harry grinned into his pillow, exceptionally glad that Ron couldn't see what he could. This flips the entire narrative on its head. Of course, this is a conflicting internal battle that Harry will deal with for the rest of the story, but the idea that Harry wanted no part of the tournament is just a movie fabrication. He wanted to be a champion. He wanted the admiration from his classmates and from Cho. Maybe he didn't care about the money because, after all, he already has some, but he definitely wanted the glory. And while he didn't put his own name into the Goblet of Fire, he was probably glad that someone else did. Keep in mind that Harry Potter is a good guy, however, we're witnessing him grow up. He has selfish desires of his own. He has flaws, and just like a true Gryffindor, he likes the feeling of winning. After all, that's what makes him such a great Quidditch player. He was not a passive, nice little boy who didn't want to be in the spotlight whatsoever. That's a lie that the movie has fed to you. Like I said, this will unravel more and more as we get into this book and movie, so stay tuned to the channel as we continue throughout this series comparing the movie to the book scene by scene and chapter by chapter. If you enjoyed the video and learned something new, leave a like and subscribe. Also, if you're new here and have missed out on old episodes, you can check out the series playlist, which is linked in the description, to catch up on everything you've missed so far. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.